This episode of On the Beat is brought to you by Ingles. Shop online with Ingles Curbside Pickup. New curbside stores opening every week. Please welcome Mike Griffith.
Well, hey everybody, Mike Griffith here. Welcome to tonight's Ingles on the Beat, and it is always busy with Georgia athletics. It seems a big honor today for Charlie Condon. Not a shocker to see Charlie Condon named the SEC Baseball Player of the Year. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about that baseball team, their seeding. This could be a World Series team, but how they fare in Birmingham this week could have everything to do with that. The women's softball team stayed alive, and another Georgia football player with some issues in his drive. Sacovie White, give you the details on that. You may or may not have heard that this young football player was arrested and jailed Saturday morning for reckless driving, according to police. According to the officer's report obtained by the Atlanta Journal-Constitution on Monday morning via open records request, White was traveling at a high rate of speed the wrong way down East Clayton Street, with a passenger hanging out the window of an orange Dodge Charger. An Athens Clarke County police officer parked in his patrol car observed this, and he was pulled over at 2:06 a.m. at the corner of Clayton and Lumpkin. According to the report, White showed, quote-unquote, complete disregard for the safety of his passengers, himself, and innocent civilians, and, quote-unquote, posed a threat to public safety as the incident occurred during a time of high pedestrian traffic. White was pulled over, cited for reckless driving and driving the wrong way on a one-way street. His car was impounded, and he was transported to the Athens Clarke County Jail. He was booked at 3:04 a.m. and released on a $26 bond 1 hour later. This is a member of the 2024 recruiting class out of Cartersville. You may have seen him catch 2 passes for 29 yards in the spring game. This is a player, obviously, Georgia is very excited about. It's the second traffic-related issue of the spring. You remember Trevor Etienne had an issue in March for driving charges. Coach Kirby Smart made some comments after Etienne's arrest and said, I can only speak for my university, but I think we do it better than anybody in the country in terms of education and speakers. People have looked at the NIL and the players' ability to attain these cars. Is that part of the factor? Are we shifting blame? I don't know. Young men, fast cars, tickets, late nights doesn't always seem to be a good mix. So that is the update on Sacovie White. I'm not sure when or if Kirby and Georgia will address this. There's typically policies in place for this. Teams have penalties in place, most always handled internally. Georgia will certainly look into this. So those are the details around Sacovie White. We talked about Charlie Condon and Georgia baseball. Let's get into that a little bit more. Some good news. Charlie Condon does lead the nation in home runs, 35. He's Georgia's all-time home runs leader with 60. Leads the nation in slugging percentage and total bases and batting average. He is the Herschel Walker of Georgia baseball. And so this honor, very befitting. First time that a Bulldog has won the SEC Player of the Year honors since 2008. And, of course, that was the last time Georgia went to the College World Series. Now, I teased you, and I told you that there's a chance they can go again. And here's the numbers. If a team hosts a super regional, there is a 70% chance, approximately 70% chance, that they will go to the College World Series. Georgia is on the cusp of being a top 8 seed. The top 8 seeds in the country host super regionals. Now, you don't just go right to the super. You got to start out with a regional. Well, we know Georgia has done enough. They have the number 6 RPI in the nation. They're ranked. I've seen them up to 8. I think they're 11 and others. There's more polls coming out. They're a top 10 team. They're going to host a regional. There will be a 4-team regional in Athens, not this weekend. This week is the SEC baseball tournament. Next week, there will be a 4-team regional in Athens. And if Georgia wins that, they advance to super regionals. In super regionals, 2 teams play a best-of-3 series, and the winner of that series goes on to be a part of the College World Series. So Georgia right now is fighting to get a high seed. If they're a top 8 seed, that means if they win their regional, they would host yet another weekend in a best-of-3 series, and that's where that 70% kicks in. Well, what do they got to do? They play LSU on Tuesday. Some of you watching the show, this game may have already taken place. For those of you watching it tonight, the game's tomorrow at 10:30. It's going to be on the SEC Network, 10:30 Eastern, Hoover Metropolitan Stadium. against LSU. Yes, that LSU, the defending national champions LSU, the team that Wes Johnson helped coach for 2 years, LSU. Obviously, a lot of those Tigers have moved on, notably Paul Skeens, last year's #1 overall pick. Now Wes Johnson is working with likely this year's #1 pick, Charlie Condon. So let's see what happens between the Bulldogs and the Tigers. This is a loser out game on Tuesday. Now, once you win Tuesday, everything becomes double elimination moving forward. The winner of this game would play Kentucky on Wednesday. A lot of people project Kentucky as the nation's #1 seed. I think they finished second or third. I think Tennessee might have eked them out there at the end for the SEC crown. But Kentucky, considered by many the best team in the country. I know that's strange. We didn't see it coming. It's a scrappy bunch. I saw today their coach won Coach of the Year over Wes. Tells you a lot. That's the team that will be waiting for the winner of Tuesday's game between Georgia and LSU. That's when it gets into double elimination. I tend to think that if Georgia can beat LSU, I think there's a good chance they'll be a top 8 seed. Doesn't lock it down because you got to look what other teams are doing, right? And Georgia finished 6th in the SEC. Okay, so even though their ranking is high and their RPI is high, where they actually finished in the SEC wasn't as high. They were the number 16. So what do the teams do that are ahead of them, right? And what does North Carolina do? And some of the other teams that are Florida State that could be in that position to be in that top 8 seed. So there are some other factors. I think if Georgia won 2 games at the SEC tournament, I do think they would do it. But I think they need to beat LSU. I do. I think they need to win against LSU to be a top 8 seed. So that's the situation there. You did see they lost 2 of 3 to the Gators. Florida came up here, did a great job. Georgia played well. Florida played better. Georgia doesn't have a lot of pitching depth. I think most of you know that, but they have a tremendous offensive lineup. They've hit 140 home runs this season. That is a program record. Now let's talk about the softball team. Okay, because the softball team looked like they might be on the outs. They got upset on Saturday by Liberty. And for those of you who don't know, I think most people watching probably understand how dominant pitchers are in softball. You run into a hot pitcher that's moving the ball, and they can beat anybody. A great example, Liberty beat UCLA last year. They darn near took out Georgia. They beat Georgia on Saturday. Now, regional play is double elimination. So Georgia lost at home on Saturday to Liberty by a 7-3 count. They had to come back and beat Charlotte, and then they had to beat Liberty twice on Sunday. First game, no problem. Beat them handily, beat them by 9 runs. Second game, it took a Sidney Chambly walk-off RBI single in the bottom of the 7th. Dogs had to come up with 2 runs to beat Liberty in the elimination game on Sunday night. Third-year coach Tony Baldwin said, I thought we came out obviously with a lot of fight in game 1. That was the 14-5 win. We were getting some good pitches to hit and took care of business. Sometimes when things go your way, when there's such a gap, when just everything's going right in that first game, the second game becomes a mental challenge because as soon as maybe it doesn't go that way, you start to think, oh no. Baldwin says, maybe we did that for a few innings there. But I thought we got back into just really competing and showed the fighting competitiveness that our group has. And Tony Baldwin was very proud of his team as they will advance to play UCLA. They beat UCLA earlier this year in Clearwater, Florida. A lot different than traveling to out to Los Angeles, out there to Easton Park, where you got to play the Bruins, a traditional powerhouse. They were once the New York Yankees of college softball. They're still dynamic. That's going to be a test. Now, this is a veteran Georgia team. Most of these girls have, I want to say they have 9 girls that have graduated. This is the team that you circled and said, this is the one that can win it all. Okay. They went out and they got Lily Backus. She was a pitcher at North Carolina, transferred in. They had Shelby Walters, who transferred in from Duke last year. And then Madison Kirpix was already on the team. They're 3 deep in pitching. They got All-Americans all over the field. They hit the ball really well. It's going to come down to how well they play next weekend against UCLA, a best-of-3 super regional. The winner of that advances to the College World Series, Women's College World Series in Oklahoma City. Now, you might wonder about Georgia basketball and how that found its way into this show tonight. The Ant-Man, Anthony Ant-Man Edwards, let me tell you, I enjoyed covering this guy. His charisma was through the roof. I always wonder what would have happened if Nick Claxton would have come back for another year and you could have paired Nick Claxton and Anthony Edwards, would Tom Crean still be the head coach? Could the Bulldogs have put together a Final Four run? Maybe. Right now, though, Anthony Edwards has helped the Timberwolves knock out the defending NBA champion Denver Nuggets after trailing by 20 points in the third quarter last night on the road in Denver. They were down 58-38. Ant-Man and the T-Wolves come back. Ant-Man 16 points, 8 rebounds, 7 assists for Anthony Ant-Man Edwards, the Atlanta product. Didn't shoot great, 6 of 24, 2 of 10 from 3. But Anthony Edwards affects the game in so many other ways. I just think the confidence and the air that he has about him, you hear the Jordan comparisons, he's dynamic. He's an incredible athlete. He's a fun kid. He's got an edge. I know this is a player that Georgia is very proud of, and he is fun to follow. I thought the fact that he stayed in state and played at Georgia spoke volumes for both the University of Georgia and Anthony Edwards. Remember, Anthony never really got to finish his career with Georgia because of COVID. And we all wonder what might have happened if the Dogs had been able to play Florida in round 2. They'd already beaten Ole Miss in the first round. What if that tournament would have finished? Anthony Edwards had already told us, and this is also amazing. Think about this era of opt-outs. Ant-Man knew that there was a good chance he was going to be the first or second pick in the NBA draft. And yet when I asked him, I said, if this team doesn't make the NCAA tournament and it plays in the NIT, will you play? And he said, as long as our team is playing, I'm going to be out there playing. Ant-Man Edwards pledged to play in the NIT, even though he was looking down the barrel of a $40 million contract as a 1 or 2 pick. But think about that commitment. That's who Anthony Edwards was at Georgia. I also remember talking to some other student athletes that said he was the nicest athlete in the student support center. You would have never known he was an athlete. So, and they said that without even knowing I was a reporter. So Anthony Edwards was a prince of a guy at Georgia, and now he's representing Georgia in the NBA and doing a fantastic job with the Minneapolis Timberwolves. I know a lot of people are excited about that. Now, second segment coming up. ESPN put out a post-spring top 25. I just did this the other day. I'm going to call Slayball, my buddy Mark. I'm going to say, Mark, are you stealing my ideas? Just kidding. He's not stealing anything. They got their own agendas. They know when they're going to put out their list. But I want to go down that top 25 list. And I'm going to call out teams that are too high or too low on that ESPN post-spring top 25. And I'm going to see if you agree with me. I also want to talk a little bit about Ole Miss and the number of transfers. You might remember last week we had Peter Burns on from the SEC Network. I wrote a little story about Lane Kiffin with some very telling statistics that's going to make you wonder if he really belongs in the top 10. And then, of course, the third segment, we always do our hot and cold. Always fun to try and guess who that might be. But right now, let's recognize our sponsor, Ingles. When we come back, we'll get into that top 25 list as well as that report on Ole Miss.
We're proud to work with hundreds of local farms and businesses in the communities we call home. Not only does it ensure that you get top quality fresh items for your family table, it's a way for us to support the amazing individuals who pour their heart and soul into delivering the very best they can do. Quality, freshness, community, it's all in the bag. Ingles, low prices, love the savings.
Welcome back to the program. So Ole Miss, Lane Kiffin, undefeated on Twitter. This is where I start. I think that, a lot of people like the Lane Kiffin story. I mean, he is very entertaining and his teams are entertaining. I don't know if you saw the spring game. It really wasn't a game at Ole Miss. They did a 7-on-7, a non-tackling 7-on-7, and then they turned their guys loose to have fun. They did like a dunk contest, I think, was one of the things. A tug of war, a dunk contest. I don't want to say they made a mockery out of the spring game, but they made a mockery out of the spring game. But when I was talking to one of the reporters from there, Neil McCready, Neil said, look, Lane just said, why would I want to risk any of my guys getting injured? We've seen them scrimmage plenty. Why not let them have fun? Why do I want to show anything on tape? Why do I want to give anybody any information about my football team? Why not make it fun for the players? Okay, I think there's some wisdom in that. But I'm not sure that Lane Kiffin is the type of coach that can win the big game. And here's why. Lane, all time, is 1-11 against top 5 ranked teams. 0-4 during his 4-year tenure with the Rebels. And you might remember last fall when they played Georgia, they lost 52-17. I remember hearing people say that was an upset. This upset brewing, upset watch. Georgia averaged more than 10 yards per play on Ole Miss. I personally think that was Georgia's most complete game of the year. I think it was their best game of the year. And why wouldn't it have been? It was the only game they had Brock Bowers, Ladd McConkey, and Kendall Milton near 100% the whole game. Every other game you were missing somebody or somebody was banged up. But that night showed you what Georgia football was at its pinnacle. And Carson was, I think, 18 out of 25 for 306, a couple touchdowns. He had a pass tip that was picked, but he played really well too. So that was an Ole Miss team that had everybody on upset watch when everybody came here to Athens and Sanford State. All Lane Kiffin, mastermind versus Kirby Smart. And Georgia just dominated Ole Miss. So I know that Ole Miss has this number one portal class. I get it. They got 22 transfers, I think, right now, which is mind-boggling. And they stole some of the best players in the league from other schools. I mean, remember that Antoine Wells Jr., the Juice Wells guy from South Carolina? He's at Ole Miss. Walter Noah, big-time D-tackle. Georgia wanted this guy he was at A&M. He's now at Ole Miss. I can't pronounce Princely's last name, but this outstanding Florida linebacker, Umanilim, also transferred over there to Ole Miss. So they've got a really good class. Now, they did lose Quinshon Junkins to the Ohio State, former SEC rushing leader. But they have Jackson Dart back. I think he's a pretty good quarterback. I did a little poll earlier today, and I asked people what they thought about Ole Miss for next year. And I said, what is most likely? And the number one answer, 49.3% of the people said that it was most likely that Ole Miss would make the 12-team playoff field. 32% said that Ole Miss would not make the playoff field. 18.5% said that not only would Ole Miss make the playoff field, but they would win a game. So I guess to refresh there, 2/3 of the people think Ole Miss is going to make the playoff, and 1 out of every 5 believes they're going to win a playoff game. I don't know how that jibes with you. I'm not convinced Ole Miss is going to make the playoff. I'm not a believer. I got to see it to believe it. Now, I promised you that I would do kind of a depth charge on the preseason, on this top 25. Let's see what they call it. Post-spring top 25. Number 1, Georgia Bulldogs. Of course. Why wouldn't it be? Georgia has a pretty healthy class of transfers too. I would say the Dogs might have 10. It's just par for the course now. It's what you need to do. ETN is going to be key for Georgia, Florida running back. So Georgia, number 1, I'm going to call that a bump. I'm already sounding like I'm running the fence. Number 2, Ohio State. I'm going to leave the Buckeyes right there. I'm good with Buckeyes at number 2. Texas, number 3. I'm going to say that's too high. I'm not buying it. I know they got Isaiah Bond in the portal. I'm well aware of that. I know he's a great weapon. I'm just not convinced. They lost some guys up front that I just don't think you can replace. I think the SEC schedule will take a toll. I think it's different than the Big 12. So I'm going to say that Texas is too high at number 3. Oregon Ducks, number 4. I always wave the Dan Lanning flag. I do. I think Dan's a great coach, but he's got to replace his quarterback. And this just seems a little high for me for a team that's going to be playing in the Big 10 for the first year. And that's a lot of travel. I think that travel's going to be tougher than they think. Notre Dame, number 5. They've got Riley Leonard, the Duke quarterback. All right, why not? I'm going to say even low. I'm going to say Notre Dame will be a top 4 team. So go higher on Notre Dame. Here's Ole Miss at 6. You already heard what I had to say about them. I'm not buying it. I'm just not. Alabama 7. I'm going to put Alabama higher. I do. I think Alabama will finish higher than Ole Miss. And part of that is I didn't think Nick Saban did a great job at the beginning of last year. And nobody ever talks about that. It's his last year, so let's just say it was his best coaching job. It wasn't. It wasn't his best coaching job. He lost by 10 points at home to Texas, a team they were better than. And then they benched their quarterback against South Florida. That's not good. That's not good coaching. I thought they got out to a slow start. So who's to say that maybe Kalen DeBoer can't do a better job than Nick Saban did? I bring that up, and people in Alabama think I'm crazy. You want to, find me and hunt me down. But why not? Maybe, now that Jalen Milroe has more experience, he should make a pretty big jump from year 1 to year 2. And he's shown what he can do. DeBoer's a pretty good coach. He's all about the offense. So I'm going to go higher on Alabama. Missouri, number 8. Okay, here's another one. I know that this is conventional wisdom. I know that Missouri's schedule suggests it's going to be easy, but I've got to see it to believe it. Some programs are not built to handle success. I think Missouri is one of those programs. So 8's too high for me. Number 9, Utah Utes. Cam Rising's back leading the offense, but again, this is a team transitioning. Big 12. Is Utah a 9 team? That seems a little high for me. Michigan 10, big overhaul in Ann Arbor. New head coach, lots of new talent coming in, new quarterback. 10 seems a little high. Florida State 11. Look at this. They've got a picture of Mike Norvell running wind sprints with his team. I mean, he's just the cat's meow, the victims that got left out, that put unconquered on their rings even after they lost 63-3. Can you tell I'm a little tired of the Florida State storyline? And what stinks about that for me is that they're probably going to be really good. So I think 11 is too low. I think Florida State's going to be higher. Penn State, number 12, James Franklin is still there. Michigan is going to drop off. Penn State is going to move up. 12 is too low. Go higher. 13, NC State Wolfpack. Dave Doran quietly guided the Wolfpack to 34 wins in the past 4 seasons, 9-4 last year. And they have Grayson McCall taking over the offense. You might remember he was a star at Coastal Carolina. I'm going to push. I'm going to leave NC State right there at 13. LSU 14. Man, I think Brian Kelly is a really good football coach. But I don't know if I'm buying this. Not sure about 14. I'm going to go, that's too high. Tennessee 15. I think Tennessee is going to be better. I think Nico Imabahava, the quarterback, is going to have a great season. I think they're going to be dynamic. Here's Clemson at 16. I think that's too low. Let's say higher. Then we get into teams like Kansas State, Oklahoma State, Arizona. Look, I'm not going to pretend to know anything about Kansas State, Oklahoma State, Arizona. I do know Arizona's quarterback. He did win. Noah Fafita did win the freshman offensive player of the year. He's pretty good. First year head coach. So then there's Virginia Tech, Kansas, Iowa. I mean, this stuff is just, you get into these teams, do any of you really care? I mean, once we get past 16, I don't. So let's leave it right there. I think we've done a pretty good job going over those teams. Is there a surprise team in the SEC this season? I think Kentucky could be. I know I didn't have them very high in my ratings the other day, but Brock Vandagriff is a character guy and a great leader. And Jamon Dumas-Johnson was a great leader here. And I think Mark Stoops is vastly underrated. So Kentucky is my dark horse to make the college football playoff. How about that? You didn't think you'd get that pick out of me. Let's take a break right now. And when I come back, I'm going to talk to you about the hot teams, the hot players, and the cold teams. And this next segment will be brought to you by Anytime Heating, Cooling, and Plumbing. We'll be right back.
Your family stays comfortable all year long? Our family of trained comfort specialists are available anytime to service or repair your system. Or it may be time to replace your old units with a new Trane HVAC system.
We are a locally owned family business, and we carefully select the technicians who we send into your home.
At Anytime Heating, Cooling, and Plumbing, we are large enough to handle all of your HVAC and plumbing needs,
but small enough to care.
Call today to take advantage of our 3-visit annual maintenance plan.
How's it going? So up next for the Ant-Man is the Dallas Mavericks. And how exciting will that be Wednesday night? We'll get to see Anthony Edwards, the number 3 seed versus the 5 seed. The Mavericks upset number 1 seed Thunder. On the other side of the bracket in the Eastern Conference, you got the Celtics and the Pacers. So how cool would that be? Ant-Man is right now the hottest. And his story is going to continue to blossom and get bigger because he is a very charismatic young man. And I saw that when he was at Georgia. You put Anthony behind the microphone and he smiles a lot. and he doesn't mind telling you how things are. Now, we talked a little bit earlier about his shooting, only 6 for 24 and 2 of 10 from 3. And here's what he said. It was tough, man, because I couldn't find myself, my rhythm tonight. Had to trust my teammates. I just had to make the right plays throughout the rest of the game. I did that, and my teammates made shots. Big shout out to those guys. There's more ways to win the basketball game when you're not an offensive player. I'm not one-dimensional. I'm not just a guy who can score. I'm a guy, whoever their best guard is, I can go lock them down. Feel like I did that in the fourth quarter, in the third quarter, and the fourth quarter, and that's what turned the game around. You've got to like that confidence, and you've got to like that attitude. These are things, and I've heard people say, oh, well, why didn't, Georgia? He was a freshman. He was 17 years old when he came to Georgia. Think about this. A lot of the things that were instilled in his mind, he would develop later in the NBA. But, at Georgia, he was literally a 17, 18-year-old kid. But you could see the greatness then. You could really feel the presence that Anthony has. And I think that as the NBA gets to know him better, he's in kind of a small market up there in Minneapolis. Just imagine if he was in a big market, that could happen one day. But right now, there's no doubt about it. Anthony Ant-Man Edwards is blazing hot in the NBA. Charlie Condon, you've heard his name all year long here on the beat. Georgia's best baseball player in history. The Herschel Walker, Georgia baseball. Now he's the SEC Player of the Year. He's a leading candidate for the National Player of the Year. He's a leading candidate to be the #1 overall pick in the Major League Baseball draft. He's going to lead Georgia into that game against LSU on Tuesday. Charlie leads the country in home runs. He's got 35. He leads the nation in batting average. He leads the nation in on-base percentage. He's just one tough out. How could he be anything but hot? How about not hot and hot all at once? That's hard to do, but the Georgia softball team accomplished that. I understand the Liberty pitcher was dynamic. I get that. But this Georgia team, it's a veteran team, and that was a tough drawback to watch them lose on Saturday. Now they came back and won in gritty fashion, and maybe this will ignite the spark to get them back to the Women's College World Series for what would be the first time, I believe, since 2021, year before Coach Donnie Baldwin took over. So hot and not, and then not. Who would have think we would say this? This could change quickly, but Georgia baseball drops 2 out of 3 against Florida at home, sellout crowds. I think if they win 2 out of 3, I think they'd already have that super clinch, that top 8 seed. But as it is, the pitching got eviscerated. And Wes Johnson is a metrics guy. There's only so much he can do. It's going to be real interesting to see how Georgia approaches the SEC baseball team tournament and what the Dogs get done there. So that's going to do it for the show tonight. I'd like to thank my producer, Kaylee Manziel. I'd like to remind all of you to watch DawgNation Daily each day at 10 a.m. with Brandon Adams. Wednesday night, it's Jeff Sentel's Intel. A lot of recruiting news going on right now. You're going to want to check DawgNation.com. Check out all those recruiting stories. Check out those visitor lists. Kirby, this time of year, this is when he really starts to operate and gets things set up. Jeff Sentel does his show on Wednesday nights. You're going to want to check that out. Thursday nights, Kaylee and Connor, a lot of fun with it. You never know what they're going to talk about. Some things that I think are just outside the bound, they're going to take it there. They're going to have some fun with it. A little bit of controversy, a little bit of fun. Hope you enjoy that show on Thursday night. I'll be on with Brandon Adams on Wednesday. I'll appear on DawgNation Daily as his guest. I look forward to that, and I look forward to joining you guys next Monday night. I know it's a holiday, but I'm going to try to pull it off. It's going to be the eve of the SEC spring meetings, and there's going to be a lot discussed in Destin next week. I'd like to give you a preview of that right here next Monday night. This week, everybody be safe. Have a great week, and